So for 45 minutes, I'm going to talk incredibly fast. So the first thing I want you to know is to keep you awake, I'm going to run around. And I will share the slides with you. So if you do like to take pictures of slides, that's fine. I share it openly. But if you also want to copy the slides, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll have my contact information at the end so you don't have to feel stressed, because I'm going to give you a ton of science. So whereas you heard stories of individuals killing it, right, across different domains, what your story is unique to you. And so what I'm going to do is give you the science to define what is the experiment, like Hayden did, for you to find your best work-life blend. So if you want to take notes, I prefer not the phone, just because we get distracted. But anyway, so the reality of the work-life balance, which you notice I did not call it, I called it blend, because balance gives the connotation of zero-sum. And in life, we know that energy is actually what we're harnessing, and it's not just a function of time. So we're going to take away the myths with two important parts of the science. One is social science, how we do work. We talked about it a lot today with implicit bias, right? What are the norms in our culture for female leaders? And what are the norms in our culture overall? We have this unconscious bias that's a social science element and a neuroscience element. So we're going to talk about the neuroscience because we have so much more clarity than we did even 10 years ago. So when people in the past would talk about they can't have it all, or they can't have it all at the same time, or some version of that, I argue it actually might have been true in the 1900s, 1970, 1980, 1990. Now with MRIs, we know with the neuroscience what actually fuels us. And so we actually can now create our own work-life blend with this science. So first of all, we all learn through story. You all know that. You're product managers who tell stories. So my story is I grew up in Minnesota. Anyone? Really? Oh my God. Yay, hot dish. Anyway, you betcha. So I grew up in Minnesota, and I started working before I think it was legal. I was like picking strawberries when I was 13, 14, because I loved making money. Even picking strawberries at 5 a.m. was like super exciting to me. And I worked my way through college, University of Minnesota, went to New York, because I graduated in a recession, and I worked all the time. I worked, and I worked. I also learned how to talk fast and walk fast and do everything New Yorkers do. And so, so when my sister called, when my husband was graduating Stanford Business School, he said, should we move out to the Bay Area in '99, or should we go back to New York? I was like, it's '99. The answer is Bay Area, right? So I came out to the Bay Area. He was working for a company called McKinsey. We've already heard some wonderful jokes about it. They work all the time. So he's working all the time, I'm working all the time, and we think this is super normal. So my sister calls me from Minnesota, and she's like, hey, it's Mom's 60th birthday coming up. Why don't you fly out to Minnesota and surprise her? My brother will fly out from Toledo, Ohio, surprise her. It's going to be awesome. But there's this problem. I work a lot, and I am very important. I was running very important meetings. There was no way I could take this time off. I was also pregnant, and so I was planning for how might I actually manage this maternity leave. So I said, this is not going to happen. And she was like, no, you're the baby. You do what I say. Get on the plane. OK, so guess what I did, right? Yeah, I got on the plane. So this is me 6 months pregnant. And my mom thinks it really is sparkling apple juice that I was drinking. So you can't really see my belly because I wear black. And that's my brother, my sister, and my mom. And it was fantastic. It was everything Minnesotans never do. We rented a limo. We spent money. Like, Minnesotans don't do that. But it was her 60th birthday, so we did it. So I fly back. I'm working all the time. I'm 8 months pregnant. And my husband comes home early from McKinsey. You don't do that. And he comes early, and he goes, you need to call your dad. I was like, why do I need to call Dad? He goes, you need to call your dad. My brother had been killed in a plane crash. He was 37. I was 8 months pregnant, filled with hormones. And my big brother, who was always going to take care of me if my husband found some cute little thing. Like, my world changed. And I almost didn't get on that plane. I thought I was going for my mom. I was going now for my brother. And more importantly, I went for myself. If I hadn't gotten on that plane, if my work devotion had stopped me from seeing him the last time and having those shiny moments with my mom, I would not be on this stage. And so I dug into the data, because that's what you do in Silicon Valley when you have a life crisis, is you look at data. And you find that your idea of work actually is kind of like what everyone else's idea of work is. That's the social science. We all believe this. We all play Miss Pac-Man. Well, I did. Sorry, I need that back. Okay, thank you. So I dug into the data, and I found I wasn't alone. There were a ton of women feeling this. And so when you find data of the unaddressed market, you start a company, right? Thank you. This goes over way better than in Minnesota. So it was Flexperience. It was experienced professionals who wanted to do flexible project-based work. I was trying to find a way to be a mom because I was having a baby, and be an all-in professional because I was running a team. I was running customer experience. I loved it. I really, really, really loved working. But my mom was the one who said to me at the crash site, I'll actually never forget, actually it was in my brother's apartment after the crash site, and she was holding his clothes and smelling them. And she was like, you gotta rethink work. And she didn't want me to stop because she's a feminist, and she didn't have the career she wanted, and she wanted evolution. We are evolving as women, and we are supporting each other in that evolution. But she wanted me to rethink work. And so that was my motivation. So I looked more at the data at Stanford Center of Longevity, and I looked and said, God, there's this old model that we work all the time. We don't have this thing called leisure. We then retire. And by the way, the data when you retire is you're miserable. Does anyone want to play golf all the time? I mean, maybe other things. But anyway, tennis? Anyone? Tennis. OK. So I want you to imagine a new model for yourself. This is your oxygen mask first. In this new model, I want you to consider for both yourself, for your team, for your children if you have them, education can start, work can actually start earlier in education. I can't tell you how many lawyers I've met who said if I had prototyped law firm life before I went to law school, I might have chosen a different path. Sorry for any lawyers in the room, I hope you love it. Prototype work earlier, right? Keep education explicit your whole career. We're going to live 100 years. Robots are going to take away the really boring jobs. How do we stay explicitly learning? And the thing that we often miss is that leisure part. We think that that's something for later, but I'm going to explain to you the fuel that this actually helps you do your best work. OK, if it goes forward. So the other problem was when I started my company was it said this in terms of we got to women parity at 2081. So I joined Stanford Claimants Board, the gender research arm that did the research for Cheryl's book. And I thought this might be too long. I'm kind of impatient. So I had to diagnose these myths that we were having. The first myth in the social science is that more work is better. We believe this to be true. The more we work, we believe the more valuable we are. I'll explain with data why this is not true. The second is the ideal worker. Has anyone ever heard of the ideal worker? So now you all know. It is actually a very strong researched topic. And the ideal worker is someone who prioritizes work above all else. And also, they look white, male, tall, and extroverted. It's a kind of narrow view, right, of the ideal worker. So there's not very many. There might be one in the back. Hi, Ben. Ben's hiding. So the ideal worker is something we have to chip away at. But we can't chip away at science that we don't see. So I want you to see this, and I want you to know it. And I want you to, when you identify it, go like, oh, that's ideal worker behavior. OK? This is not a science word. This is a 4-letter word that when I started my company, Flexperience, I didn't know that flexibility was a stigma. I thought flexibility was fantastic. And when I started Flexperience, so many women were like, oh my God, that's great, I want to join. And you know who didn't think it was great? The clients who were men. And by the way, I am married to a white man. I have birthed a small white boy. It is not zero sum. But my clients, who are white men, didn't want this flexibility thing because it's this stigma that you're not the all-in worker, right? So I had to rename the company. And so I named it after my brother. So Forche is his name. And I can't remember who was just up here saying, how do you bottle our learnings when crappy stuff happens? This is my way of bottling up. When crappy stuff happens, how do we keep our true north? So I knew if I named it like this, it was kind of like McKinsey. So it has no, like, it's like Bain, Forche, McKinsey. We're just like, no, just kidding. But there was no bias, right? Because I wasn't saying Flexperience. It wasn't about that we weren't dedicated. It was project-based, right? Because I was dealing with interim CMOs, interim product managers. My favorite thing to do is maternity backfills, if anyone's pregnant, just letting you know. So when you name it something that people have to understand what do you mean by that, then they get to the heart of the fact that work can be a different version, right? So when people say, what the hell do you do now? What is Forche? This is the one slide. Essentially what I care about is putting people into work with diversity and inclusion where we make work better together. That's what I care about. Now, the room is filled with heroes. Because here's the secret I couldn't do in my TEDx talk. So when I did a TEDx talk, you have like 17 minutes. I have a glorious 45 minutes. So I can tell you what I couldn't say in the TEDx, which is I needed more than one hero. I needed a team of heroes. So it started with my sister and my brother telling me what to do. But then I went to my boss, who was a white male. You hear a theme, right? And when I went to him, I was like, and I'm pregnant. So I was already feeling vulnerable, right? And I was like, it's my mom's birthday. I'm going to fly back to Minnesota. If he had said, yeah, you should go, would I have gone? No, because I'm the ideal worker. I didn't know that I was the ideal worker. I knew I was awesome, but I didn't know I was the ideal worker in that sense of social science. So if he had done that, I wouldn't have gone. But you know what he did? Because he's awesome. He was like, you definitely need to go. And I was like, but I've got these presentations to give, and it means I have to change my flight that's on the company's dime. He's like, that's fine, go. You have that power. Raise your hand if you manage people. You have so much power. How you handle your choices every day, how you say to people explicitly and implicitly what they can do, what they can't do, what choices they're making. You have so much power. So I want you to be the hero of your own story, and I want you to also be the hero of other people's story. Because the reality is, when we stay at our best and highest use, that's when we're on fire. That's when we're in flow. So let's get to the data. Okay, who knows about Harvard's study on longevity? Oh my God, of course, because you're all leaders. Okay, so basically, it is not about IQ. It is not about social class. It is about relationships, right here, community. Relationships are the number one thing, and this study was run on all white men, because it was Harvard a long time ago. So understand that, because the first thing I hear women executives say is, I don't have time for friendships. They also say I don't have time for sleep, and I don't have time for everything else. But the one that I hear more often is I don't have time for friends. So please understand that having friends actually helps you in your 100-year life. The other thing is, raise your hand if you know anything about telomeres. Okay, so now you all know. Telomeres, Google it. They are this ends of your shoelaces to your DNA. So you know how your DNA is a helio something? We have scientists in the room. Help me. Thank you. Helix. At the end, there is something that holds it together. That's more of your chronological age than your biological age. Am I doing that wrong? Anyway, thank you. I like when I have scientists right in front. So telomeres, the more they fray, the more you're going to get the age-related diseases. And the things that keep the telomeres long, yes? Relationships. Actually, what's number one? Sleep. Number two, exercise. So the things that we say we don't have time for, we are accelerating our aging in the ways that we do not want to. And I want you to remember this. Take a picture of this if you want, or I'll send you the slide. I want you to draw out for yourself, your partner, your team. What is your model? How are you going to live this gorgeous 100-year life? Because 50% of the kids born today will live to 100. I already have people in my family, right, who were born early 1900s, who are 100. So we are going to do this. We want to do it well. The other thing to understand in the science about autonomy is that, yes, in your first job, you're all in, you've got a strong cohort of friends. It's great. You've got autonomy and belonging. And we talked already today, wonderful speakers, about belonging. Belonging is critical. It means you have something that's greater than yourself, you feel heard, you feel valued, but you often lose the autonomy. And so what I want you to do for yourself, this is your oxygen mask first, is consider one step closer to autonomy for you, where you have more control over choosing where, when, and how you do your best work. So raise your hand if you were born in the United States. Okay, raise your hand if you were outside the United States. It feels like 50-50. This is an impressive crowd. So when I talk about the social science, this is an mostly American social science. So I want you to know that. And one interesting story that really matters is I had a female who was going into a boardroom of all men, and she did the fabulous thing. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to be strong, right? I'm going to be feminine. And I was like, that's great. And who's your audience? If you're going into a Japanese boardroom, are you all American on them? No. You understand the cultural context. So I want you to always understand the social science. And there's a lot of advice between, act like a man, which is what all the women who were the first of everything had to do. And so when they would give advice to me, and they'd be like, you have to do this and this and this, it was all about acting like a man. And I was like, I don't want to act like a man. I want my hair down, right? I want to be able to wear a dress. The other advice is just be authentically yourself all the time. It can be challenging if you don't understand the social science of your audience. So don't think of it as compromising yourself. Understand your audience, okay? So this is one of my favorite pieces of data. So as we look at men who are running the companies, and then you look at the percentage of women, there's actually more people named David. When I saw this, I did laugh. And then there's like a little bit and I'm a little sick inside. Like, should I have named my child David? Because I didn't name him John either. His name is Alex. So, isn't this, from a social science perspective, are we promoting the best people, right? So KPMG, when the CEO, I can't remember which CEO it was, but it was within the last 10 years when I've been doing this research, and there was a new CEO of KPMG, and he remembered that when he was in grad school, getting his master's in math, that all of his top competition were women. And then when he got to the CEO chair and he's looking at his executive staff, he was like, oh crap, where are all the women? They were my competition. I want them at my table, right? So when we talk about the social science, we have to understand that we're really trying to build towards a meritocracy. This is why I say it is not a zero-sum game, right? I want my white son to be just as opportunistic as my white daughter. And I want them to be open-minded to all the different ways in which we understand the social science and neuroscience so that it's a true meritocracy for all of us. The other thing I really hated in the data was that not only was women's happiness declining over time, but it was also declining relative to men. This comes at the heels of the data around the expectations of women. When we say we can have it all and do it all, raise your hand if that stresses you out, right? So that's what happens when we say you can have it all and do it all. So I want to give you new language around this because the conversation around work-life balance, I think no one wins, right? And it's a relatively new conversation. So even though it feels super normative to us and the clickbait, I know you've clicked on it. I did this interview with the BBC and they wanted to know how I did it all. And I was like, okay, first of all, I hate the question. So I gave them the whole social science about why work-life balance was the wrong question and how we're thinking of it. And they're like, great, great, great. They wrote this whole summary. They took pretty pictures of me and Stanford dish. And then guess what the title was? How I Found My Work-Life Balance. BBC. I called them up and I was like, I could not have been more clear. And you know what they said? It's better clicks. So the clicks are clickbait.
Like most women in commercials, I love to start each day doing yoga in my underwear.
Or journaling in my journaling nook.
And eating a wholesome, farm-fresh breakfast with a tiny spoon that I bought from a company that gives tiny spoons to underprivileged children.
Huh. According to science, most professional women don't have time for any of that.
Not that we need research to prove it, but there's research to prove it.
57% of us are up before the sun is up.
21% of us check our work email before even getting out of bed.
What?
Let's go get that morning meeting.
9% of women cite dry shampoo as one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century.
I'm done.
33% of us never make our bed. Ever.
21% of us have used an article of clothing to camouflage a stain. Very nice.
Only 16% of women would describe their morning with the hashtag blessed. And that seems kind of high.
58% of women will swear at someone or something this morning. Oh,
You know what 100% of us do have time for?
A real-life Pinterest board?
Fermenting your own small batch kombucha?
Propose?
No, Inorganic breakfast.
Okay. And you wonder why women's happiness is declining, right? All right, raise your hand if you have children. Awesome. Raise your hand if you love some child or mother in your life. Oh my God, all this data applies to you. Okay. So one of the myths is that it is better to do one or the other. And so there's the thing, the mommy wars, the whatever. So there's actually a ton of research in this. And some wonderful people curated it, Sharon Mears and Joanna Strober, and they wrote a book called Getting to 50-50. And what they found in the meta-analysis of all the research is that the kids turn out exactly the same no matter what the scenario is. Now, this is not true for low-income single parents. So I'm categorizing this. I know my audience, right? So you are leaders in companies. Whatever your childhood situation is with your kid, it's fine. Like guilt be gone, whatever it is, okay? Your marriages, when you have two working parents, are better. Do you want to know why? Tell your husband. It's because you have more sex. Okay. Wait, that's bad news? Is that bad news? Okay. Also, you use fewer antidepressants. Stay-at-home women, in particular, report more depression, more sadness, more isolation, more unhappiness. And so often you'll hear people say, it's the hardest job in the world, but there's a lot of judgment going back and forth. I want to change the conversation and change the language. It's about understanding that there's a bell curve of data. We love our data. There are outliers, right? So my kid was in speech therapy and physical therapy and all sorts of stuff where I had to do a lot more of that. And that was okay, right? But then when I'm all in and launching a company and I'm not making parent-teacher conferences, I need to feel no friction. And so I need all of us to understand that the data and the way in which we are judged and we judge others does not serve us, okay? Data, don't we love it? And then the other thing in the how, because I don't want to just give you all the data, I also want to give you some playbook stuff around how do you do some of this stuff. So I find that outsourcing things that I can afford to outsource, because I love to give jobs to other people, especially cleaning, win-win, is great. But when I was launching a company, I had no money for cleaners. We would figure out a co-op for babysitters so we could still have date nights, because otherwise date nights are really expensive. So find ways to blend that you're asking questions, that you're not repeating what our parents expected of us, what your neighbors expect of you. Like I remember when my mother-in-law, who I adore, came to our house and she was like, you have cleaners? Because I left the money out for the cleaners. And I was like, yeah. She was like, that's great. Don't you like to clean? And I was like, no. And I don't like to cook. And but if you love to cook and that's what fulfills you, great. I want you to question everything. Metacognition. Think about how you think and don't accept the norms that we're given. Okay, this study is pathetically sad, but hopefully lifts your spirits. When kids asked if they were given one wish, what do you think kids said of your parents? I wish you children have one wish to give to your parents. What is it? More time. That's the number one wrong answer. What else? What? Ice cream. I could have been on the list. I didn't see it though. Medication? I'm like, that's true. Vacation. Okay, no. So here's the data. We spend more time with our children today than stay-at-home moms in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. True fact. We spend, as working parents, more time with our children than we did before because we do have innovations, right? We are not doing all the manual stuff that we once did. The answer to this is they want us to be less stressed. Okay, so what's the social science there? And neuroscience. Mirror neurons. When I am sad, you are sad. When I am stressed, you are stressed. When I'm smiling, you are more likely to smile. Right? Mirror neurons and social science. We are the average of the 5 people we spend time with. What are we giving to our children when we are strapping them in their car seats and telling them to shut up, we have to hurry and go? Right? I love that everyone's like, oh my God, I've totally done that. Okay, so the other thing to understand in the science is that often we say this myth of like, I just want you to be happy. I want to be happy. I want my spouse to be happy. I want my kids to be happy. They've actually empirically found this in the research. That is the worst thing. Happiness is hedonic, it's present-oriented, and it's generally self-oriented, and it actually doesn't make us happy. When we are in pursuit of happiness, we actually get more miserable. Sonia Limbersky did this research. It was fascinating. The key is meaningfulness. And how we look at happiness changes over time. So when I was 18, I skydived. That made me happy. It was about excitement. Now being happy is like going to a rose garden. I'm like my mom, you know? So peacefulness is now what my present orientation around happiness is. But your North Star that you will now use in your new language because you are scientists is it's about meaning. Meaning can be hard. Meaning can be climbing Kilimanjaro. Meaning can be designing an incredibly hard product. And it's not happy. The moments are hard, right? So again, what we say, oh, we just want people to be happy. No, we don't. We want them to have a meaningful life. So the neuroscience, which is critical, is how do we fuel our brain? Because creativity is what keeps us robot-proof. Creativity is actually what makes you amazing at your job, right? People, you as managers, don't really care if your team is there for 15 hours and comes up with a single no good ideas, versus if they were there for 4 hours and killed it on like the best way to design that product, right? So the neuroscience is we need to take breaks. The number one thing for your playbook, raise your hand if you sleep fewer than 7 hours. Okay, that is your number one thing. You actually don't get a choice. Raise your hand if you sleep 8 hours. Fantastic, you get a choice in what you do next. 9 hours, you are Olympic athletes. I'm not kidding, Olympic athletes. 10? Okay. I started with 7 until I learned the neuroscience of if I don't wake up on my own before the alarm, I haven't finished essentially cleansing your brain of all the toxins. There's a great book by a neuroscientist at Cal called Why We Sleep. Highly recommend it. 7 hours is minimum, but if you wake up exhausted, it's not. And so Erin, who was talking to me earlier about when she runs 15 miles, is it? She needs more sleep because your body needs that to regenerate. So you have to understand that when you sleep less, you actually perform less. And what is the goal of your job? It's to perform well. So NASA did an experiment where if you took a nap for 26 minutes, your performance increased 34%. They have very strong data on this. And NASA literally was like, how come no one's doing it in corporate America, right? If rocket scientists are doing it, why aren't we establishing nap rooms? Now we know that there are nap rooms in a lot of cool companies. Raise your hand if you have a nap room in your company. It's happening, right? Raise your hand if anyone uses them. Okay, so go work there. Because the social science is if you have the nap room, what's the feeling you get when you walk in? And what are the looks you get when you get out? Because if I feel like I'm going in a hero, I'm going to go in like a NASA scientist, I'm taking my nap, I'll do it. But if I'm going in like I'm not amazing, then I'm not going to do it. So that goes back to the social science. What do we approve implicitly and explicitly? I think Hayden talked about decision fatigue. I love decision fatigue. And by I love it, I mean I love to avoid it. So this is a study that was done about judges. Now, judges are educated. They make decisions logically, right? Except they don't, because we're all human. So if we're tired, we actually are less risk-taking than when we are not tired. And the two things that matter of this are literally how your body feels. So if you have had a rest or food, you are more likely to take on something that has risk for you. So if you are proposing something that has risk, you want to do it after lunch to your executive team, right? If you are interviewing for something and you are the non-traditional candidate, you want to do it knowing the brain science because we are not as logical as we think. Decision fatigue is a real issue. So I want you to rethink your time because time is not actually what you're solving on. I want you to think about how we think in 90-minute bursts, and so we have to take little breaks. I hope everyone has avoided the word multitasking. Raise your hand if you still think you should multitask. Excellent, because you're leaders. Okay, so let me replace the language, multipliers. So this is research done by Jennifer Acker at Stanford Business School. Multipliers are when you combine tasks that actually enhance the experience. So raise your hand if you do walk and talks. So I schedule all my meetings where people are like, I'd like to meet with you. I'm like, fabulous, my local reservoir is here, or you do the Stanford Dish, or wherever you do your walk and talks. Walk and talks is a multiplier, but it's a double. You could also do a triple and bring your dog. Or one that I do is I volunteer. I remember when the Girl Scouts was like, hey, you can do math and spreadsheets. Can you be our treasurer? And I was like, I'm the only one that can do math and spreadsheets? Okay. So I felt bad saying no, but I realized that I would be a better community member doing offsites with my kids, like the field trips. That's the word. If I did field trips, I'm outside. Offsites, I know, I'm in work mode. They're called field trips. So in my offsites with my children, I'm outside. I'm active, which I like to be. I'm seeing how they interact with children and how I need to correct them when they are not kind. And so I'm helping the community because the teacher needs us to, corral these rambunctious kids. So that is a home run. If I had just done spreadsheets at midnight for the Girl Scouts, that would have been a single. I'm helping in the community, but I'm not getting all of it, right? And for someone else, whoever ended up doing the treasure job, maybe he or she loved it, I don't know. But the point is, find your multiplier. Does anyone have a multiplier they want to share? Because I always learn from you. Yeah. Pedicure with a best girlfriend. Done. Anyone else? Okay, think about it. Also email me because I'm always getting data. Did you have one? I know, focus on the yellow ball. You and Federer. Love it. Okay. So if I do this exercise when we have more time, but if you were, I want you to imagine taking out your phone and giving it to the person next to you who you do not know. If that person had to write a small summary of what your values were, what might that be?
Slack.
Right. So consider blocking on on your calendar, block the time that matters to you, that reflects your values. So I will say when I had children that dates were the last thing my husband and I did, and that was the dumbest idea. So don't make that mistake. You need to prioritize all the things that matter. Because if on your calendar you are only blocking work, then you are only blocking one element of your life and coming up with the crowding out feeling, that zero-sum feeling. So schedule your exercise, schedule your time with friends, and make that a non-negotiable. I'm not saying that you're not going to work hard. I'm just saying the way in which we think about time and our priorities will actually fuel our creativity, right? So design thinking. Stanford D School teaches that design constraints fuel our creativity. If we had all the money in the world, we actually would probably build pretty crappy products because we'd be like, we could do this or we could do this. There's too many choices. When you actually have forcing constraints, whether it's time or it's money or it's resources of some kind, you get more creative. So I want you to reframe that feeling of lack in fact, I say this all the time because we need language, right, to remind ourselves. And someone the other day was like, I want to get all this done, but I just need to clone myself. Ha, 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 that's not going to happen. I was like, or it could be a design constraint that you should do half as much work. You don't have to always clone yourself. Embrace the design constraint. Okay, more data. Does anyone know Leslie Perlow from Harvard Business School? Okay, now you do. She's amazing. She's an ethnographer, which means she watches how people work and studies what could be better. So BCG, everyone know BCG? Boston Consulting Group? Okay, great. So the more work you do at BCG, the belief was the more valuable you are because your billable hours are up, right? That's how you get paid well. That's how you get promoted. It makes a lot of sense until it doesn't. So what she did was she did a longitudinal study starting with one team at BCG. They called her up and said, we have a woman problem. And she was like, what? They said, too many women are leaving. The percentage of women leaving are too great than a normal turnover. What she did was she found that it wasn't a woman problem. Who knew that? It was a lack of predictability. So when she studied the team, because clients could call all the time, anyone have a boss that will call anytime they want? Or text? Yeah, I'm not. I text sometimes. Anyway, when you have no predictability because you're all in, then you are frankly kind of exhausted, and they were resigning saying, I love this job so much, but I'm exhausted. So when she put in a predictable night off a week, it was one night off a week. And so you would have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. As a team, you would discuss at the beginning of the week who had what day. What she found was higher quality output because she was able to do a pre and post with the client to say what was the quality of work before this experiment, what was the quality of work after. So the output of the team actually went up in terms of client satisfaction, and the number of hours went down by 30%. Crazy. So they worked fewer hours, had higher quality output, and then guess what the engagement when the team was? Up. Right? So this idea that more work was better was actually fundamentally proven to be incorrect. The CEO of BCG, to his credit, was like, all right, that worked on one team, what about all of Boston? Okay, now it worked all in Boston, what about all of America? Okay, that worked, now it's global. BCG went from one of the highest turnover companies to now one of Fortune's, I think it's top 10. Does anyone know? It's like 5 or 6. BCG totally attributes this to Leslie Perlow. And it's about designing experiments, because we love experiments, right, Hayden? And it's about understanding the design constraints and testing it out. Now, that might not work for your organization, but consider, because you have power in this room, what is an experiment that you can run where you can work fewer hours and have better output? Okay, 5 minutes a day. I want you to know that whenever you get stuck, which is why I had you stand up, if you want to refresh your brain, and you can actually look at real nature or fake nature. So if you're in like a place where you don't have like a lab, right? Labs don't have windows. You can actually have a picture of nature, and your brain in 5 minutes will totally reset. So whenever you feel fatigued, I want you to know, like, just take a 5-minute break. Micro resilience is a real thing. The 5 people you hang out with, you know, either make you better or they don't. So curate your 5 people. Oprah still hangs out with her best friend from growing up. Not all of them. She doesn't have all of her friends from every situation in her life as friends. She's constantly making new people and rising up. Oprah is my model for how we think about life. So think about who are the 5 people who make you better, and then think about who are the 5 people who you make better. I want you to think bidirectionally about this, because that, again, fuels your best work. And the 5-to-1 ratio is Dr. Gottman's research that we have to say 5 positive things before we say 1 constructive. This kind of goes to another wonderful panelist recommendation, which is when you have their back, right? When you say something like, hey, I really think we could have done this a little bit differently, that person will go to their amygdala. They'll go to the, you're hurting my status, fight or flight, I hear nothing that you say, right? You are dead to me. If we haven't said 5 positive things before that, it doesn't have to be in succession. It's not like therapy, right? The point is that you have to be able, in order to be effective at work, we need to be able to understand how humans hear us. I mean, have you ever given feedback to someone and you're like, oh my God, I've said this 100 times? Has anyone ever I've given this feedback and they don't listen to me? So it might not be that they're not listening. It might just be that they can literally not hear you because they don't think you have their back. So understand the science of how we hear. This is science out of Mayo Clinic, which I think is fascinating. Guess how many thoughts, so we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Guess what percentage of thoughts is the same every day, according to Mayo? Anyone? 75. Higher. 98. So our brain has 2 functions. There's the automatic brain and the reflective brain. The automatic brain keeps our energy, because our brain takes most of our energy, keeps our energy maintained. The reflective brain is when you're exhausted because you've really been thinking, right? So we run on the automatic brain. We have the same thoughts. The only way to change those thoughts is through metacognition, is through meditation. Guess what percentage of our thoughts are negative? 80. Boom. 80% of our thoughts are negative. Again, we're scanning for threats. It's neuroscience. Am I safe? Right? So if that's how our default is, how does that affect our energy and how we do our work? How does that affect our lives? So I want you to consider that the reason that meditation has grown as a fad is because it actually works. There's really good data about how you're able to see your thoughts and go, wait, that's a script in my brain I don't want to have anymore. Okay, so if you're already sleeping 7 hours a week, that could be the thing to think about. Another myth is, if you hear this in your company, left brain, right brain. Anyone still hear that? It's not true. It's been disproven. We are whole brain. Now, of course, if you have a stroke, there are certain elements. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the studies on whether you're a creative thinker or a logical thinker. We're all of it. You're all creative and you're all logical. Whether you choose to spend more time on it, no problem. But what matters most is not this battle between whether you're logical or creative. It's about saving your prefrontal cortex. This is what makes you amazing. This is what makes you tired. And so this is what you want to save through meditation, through sleep. These are the books I love. This is the slide that everyone takes a picture of if you want to take a picture of it. I try to make it so that you don't have to read all these books. So in 45 minutes, I'm summarizing the books. But for those of you who only want to do one book, my favorite is the 5-minute journal, and I am not a journaler. In fact, when Oprah would talk about journals, even though I love her so much, I would like kind of roll my eyes. Like, I don't journal. The 5-minute journal is about neuroscience. It's about gratefulness. It's about priming your brain and using the reticular activation system. And it's only 5 minutes a day. It is something I use. I've given to my kids. I've given to my clients. I've given to all of my family. They should give me a huge discount. I get no kickbacks. So I want you to keep learning, right? And I want you to think about how you do your best work, knowing these 4 things. So this is a little bit of a twist on the Japanese ikigai. Did I say that right? Any Japanese ikigai? So the ikigai is a very famous Venn diagram because we all love Venn diagrams. The one that I've shifted because I like it to be empirically based is how we learn. Because what it used to say in the ikigai is what you love. But what we've seen in the research is what you love is when you're learning. So I want you to go more to the verb than the destination. The destination isn't what you love. It's the journey of I am learning and growing, and therefore I kind of love what I'm doing, right? So I want you to have new visuals that work for you, and I want you to know that sometimes these circles are more full than others. In the beginning of our careers, it's going to be different than mid-career and late career. So we've talked a little bit about status. Hayden's already talked about the status of busy. That's another 4-letter word I want you to get rid of. When you say you are busy, it means that other people are prioritizing on your schedule. It means you're not in control. I never hear Richard Branson say, I'm busy. He's totally in control. Is his calendar quite full? Yes, right? So I don't want you to say that because it makes it sound like you're out of control. You're not busy. You just have a full plate and you're making decisions about what your priorities are. You are in control. The power of your story is so critical, and we heard that on the main stage earlier today. Understanding the power of your story. Are you the hero of your own story? Are you accidentally sabotaging yourself with one of the stories? Is Erin in the room? Erin and I were talking last night about one of the things she had in her story and in her head was that she could either exercise or sleep, like 7 hours. And I was like, tell me more. She's like, well, I just feel like those are, I have to choose. Interesting. So I asked a question like, when do you have your best ideas? She's like, when I'm running after a good night's sleep. Right? So she had a story in her head that she wasn't an all-in worker, that ideal worker. And yet, if we go back to the results and the value, it was by sleeping and exercising. And so now we're texting friends about, I was like, I'll be your sounding board for your scientific understanding of yourself and the power of your story. So know when your stories are getting in your way, and maybe work with someone, because the reality is we can't really become self-actualized all by ourselves. We are social, tribal, crazy human beings. So we have to find in that tribal way the people who are going to be your accountability partners, right? So that when you're talking about your story, that I can gently say, let's dive into that a little bit more, right? Does that work for you? So I want you to rethink your time. I really want this to be for you. You are the hero of your story, right? You are in control of your choices. Whether you decide I can have a full life, those are the words I like to use because have it all, like what the hell does that mean? I think it's way too loaded emotionally. Choose new language. Do not let the past language define you, right? So I choose to say I have a full life. And how I define that in a day and a week, it's not about balance. It's like, I really think it's a wasted conversation to sort of debate that. I think a more interesting conversation is to figure out how is it possible, what matters to me, and how do I become the hero of my own story. So what we know in the habit research, because we know we're building products that build habits, right, is that we can do one thing at a time. So write down one thing. We're almost out of time. I'm right on time. Superhero. I usually do this in an hour, and I did it for 5 minutes because I talk really fast. Thank you so much. Write down one thing that you are going to do differently. If you are sleeping less than 7 hours a night, you do not get a choice. And I'll give you one more piece of data. When you sleep fewer than 7 hours a night, I think it's like it's like 5. The impairment that you have when you are driving is the same as being legally drunk. So I care about this room greatly. I want to see all of you women thrive in your careers and thrive in your lives. And we know that mistakes happen. So I want you to use the science to be your excuse to sleep. Because you can say, it's not about you taking care of yourself and that's so bad. It's because I am not going to put myself at risk or anyone else on the road. I don't want you guys driving on the road with my family when you have slept 5 hours because you're a hero at work. I don't want that for you. I don't want that for anyone. So sleep has to be paramount. We have to look at the science and say the narrative we've been told that staying up all night is some amazing feat is absolutely ludicrous. Okay? So that's the 7 hours. If it's something else, the next thing I generally do is think about exercise. It really does fuel you, and think about your multipliers. But what I would love is for you to tell me. So I am a scientist who runs a company. Actually, I run a company. I'm not really a scientist. But I curate science. I am an imposter because I hang out with scientific people who make me smarter. So I want to hear from you. You may text me, you may email me, you may link in with me. I would love to know what you're doing. I'm writing a book on this, and I want to know what works. So I teach at Stanford, I teach at Haas, I teach at companies, and the reason is I want you to do your best work on terms that work for your full life with no regrets. Thank you.